minutes. We are live. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining our session today. My name is Alyssa Fusisi, and I'm a principal with Kearney and Company, and I'll be your moderator this morning. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists here this morning to talk about risk analysis and the tools that they use to identify and address emerging risks. As we all know, and we've talked a lot about in the other great sessions we've had so far, the current pandemic has exposed a lot of additional risks to the federal agencies and exposed additional vulnerabilities for future global events. As a result, we essentially need to have a sound methodology and framework to assist with the identification, assessment, and monitoring of risks. And this needs to be supplemented by a variety of different technology and tools. Our panelists this morning are going to talk through their programs that they oversee, as well as the ways that they use different types of technology and tools to support the ongoing identification and analysis of emerging risks that can impact an agency's mission delivery. First, let's start with some introductions of our panelists. All right, so first up, we have Miss Jing Williams. She is the Director of the Division of Systems Policy and Compliance within the Office of Financial Systems Policy and Oversight at the Department of Health and Human Services. Jing is responsible for managing HHS's financial system policy and compliance program to provide the department's financial system policy and guidance, security and internal controls oversight, and audit response and remediation. Jing led the department collaboration effort across the CIO, CFO, and CISO communities to mature the HHS financial systems control environment and reduce risk across this environment. As a result, HHS was able to successfully downgrade their long-standing IT material weakness in fiscal year 2018 and continue to increase risk management capabilities across the financial systems that support over 300 HHS programs. Next, we have Ms. Karin Dasuki. Karin is the Director of the Office of Finance and Accounting within the Department of Energy. Karin oversees the office, which is responsible for the department's accounting and financial operations. That includes financial statements, investments, loan accounting, fraud risk management, internal controls, and audits with staff that are located in multiple physical locations across the nation. And last, we have Ms. Alyssa Smiley. She's the Acting Director of the Risk Management and Assurance Division within the Department of Homeland Security. In this role, Alyssa has assisted with developing a robust risk-based information technology assurance program that encompasses federal requirements while also increasing control environment maturity and progression for the department. In addition, her office has been working to increase department-wide service provider monitoring, implementation of data analytics, as well as progressing the coupling of information technology with risk and impact, particularly as it relates to financial reporting and the related processes. This is to help assist in utilizing risk-based prioritization for the limited resources that the department has for risk management. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let's get started with our first polling question to help us get a better understanding of where the maturity of our audience risk management program is. So Kia, can you launch our first poll, please? All right, so our first question is just to get a gauge as to the maturity level of our audience risk management program. So as we wait for those responses to come in, All right. So Jing, do you want to go ahead and get started while we wait for the results of the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alyssa, for the great introduction. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our session and hope you all enjoyed the summit so far. It's my pleasure being with you and the wonderful speakers today to discuss risk management. I will start by sharing my experience at HHS and I hope you will find it helpful. So, next slide, please. So who we are and what we do as Financial System Policy and Compliance Division, we provide oversight to system cross-department, supporting HHS programs to achieve our mission of enhancing the health and the well-being of all Americans. In dollar sense, it amounts to 2.4 trillion in FY 2020, representing 1/3 of the total federal budget. With a large number of money flowing through the systems, our work in risk management and internal control is critical for financial stewardship and accountability. Especially, the risk landscape has become more complex with cyber threat, risk from operation, emerging technologies. We need to identify and respond emerging risk timely and effectively. To achieve that, we set our goals to mature financial system control environment and reduce risk through governance, risk and control, and continuous monitoring. Next is our journey map. As you can tell from the top, we started our program from 2015 and with HHS leadership's priority to remediate a long-standing IT mature weakness in financial systems. Over the years, we were able to connect people from CFO, CIO, and CISO communities for risk awareness, improving our processes, and leverage technology and data for risk management. As Alyssa introduced earlier, we were able to downgrade IT mature weakness in FY 2018. And our story didn't stop there. We continued to enhance our risk management by leveraging technologies and tools and monitor the emerging risks. I'll be sharing some highlights, what we have learned along the way. Next slide, please. When we started, we asked ourselves a question, how to build a good foundation to manage the known and anticipate the unknowns. The challenge we have faced was the federated environment at HHS with siloed activities, which resulting in retrospective and reactionary risk management. To overcome the challenge, we focused on integration to connect the management line of defense. As you can see from the chart, the left from system and operation to the compliance management, and then to the third line of defense of assurance program. The connection helped us enable proactive risk identification and monitoring. With the value created by working with different stakeholders, it also helped us transform our roles from compliance checker to risk advisor or strategic partner. At the bottom, in the emerging area, we do our horizon scan for changes and risks from ERM, program policy, new technology, or system or program changes a plant, analyzing the impacts and share our insight and collaborate with stakeholders. As an example, when our system started to explore RPA a couple years ago, we anticipated the risks and developed guidance on critical controls that to assist them implement. A system team implement those controls, we assess the risk and make recommendation for improvement. And that also help us to learn and refine our guidance for compliance group as they continue to use that to monitor the risk and use that as an input for assurance program. The continuous feedback loop among the lines of defense really helped everybody to understand risk and address risk within the organization. Next slide. Another challenge that we faced was the information is not flow through or understood by all levels. For example, the system team are well versed on NIST controls. They produce great system security and risk assessment, risk scores, but that data need to be translated to be understood by all levels. We developed and implemented a management assessment tool to convert the data we collect from system compliance group into risk intelligence to help answer questions at different levels. For example, do we have material weakness? Do we have significant deficiency? Are the remediation efforts effective? What is the residual risk? And this helps us to tie the operation data into strategic objectives and communicate the right information to the right people at the right time and enable informed decision. Next slide. As we continue to expand the breadth and depth of our risk analysis, we need to be able to respond quicker with scalability, automation, and create more insight or foresight for the data we already have. So the risk management and data analytical tools we invested helped us to get there. I picked some colorful charts. Behind the colors and complexity, it allows us to scale up quickly by adding more systems or controls into our assessment as needed, and also provide ongoing monitor for emerging issues for timely assessment and early detection of risk. Another part I want to share is that utilizing tool also help us to take advantage of the industry best practice. For example, the strategy maps that the tool brought to us help us build the foundation and adding our data and connect the controls to risk and strategic objective and leading to better understanding of risks and the business impact to different stakeholders. So there may be a risk we could not predict no matter how much we prepare. Looking back, nobody predicted the pandemic. We didn't know how long it lasts. There's a lot of uncertainties up and down with the COVID-19 cases. In the meantime, it also gives us opportunity to accelerate the digitalization of our program. In addition to the risk management I talked about earlier, we also increased our capability in collaboration and also in the project management perspective. So the graphic I show is our agile board for sprint planning and retrospect, which allow us to be more nimble and adaptive to changes in the virtual environment. Next slide. Looking ahead, I have talked a lot about process, tools, and technologies, but nothing could happen without people with commitment, collaboration, communication to connect the dots. Those are the key value took us where we are, and with the talented people plus imagination and innovative mindset, it will help us continue to explore more ahead. So last is a photo, one of my favorite one. It is the deepest part of the universe created by Hubble telescope after hundreds of hours of photographing, data synthesizing. And that's where we are going. And good luck on your journey to discover and embrace risk and opportunities. Thank you, and I'll turn back to Alyssa.
All right, thank you so much, Jing. So going back and kind of revisiting that first poll and the results that we had kind of a split right between defined and integrated in terms of our ERM program. Only 5% had optimized, so not a lot of us have an optimized ERM program, but obviously a goal for most of us, and somewhere that I think Jing sounds like, based on the strategy that HHS has been taken, that you guys are well on your way to get. too. So that being said, let's launch our second poll before we have Karin talk a little more about what they're doing over at DOE. So looking to kind of understand if technology has improved the outcome of your risk management program. So Karin, with that being said, let's move on to talk about the Department of Energy.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karin Dasuki. I work for Department of Energy. Some of you may or may not know Department of Energy has a slew of missions, so we are also known as the Department of Everything. We go from non-proliferation of nuclear detections and also in defense area, as well as Energy Star appliances and renewable energies, as well as fossil energy research. And the most important of all, we have the jewels of the government and the United States, which are the national labs. Some of you may have heard of Los Alamos National Lab, as well as Lawrence Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley. So those are some of the famous national labs that we own by the government, and DOE has been tasked to run them and operate them. So we have a lot of what we call management and operations contractors that run these labs and sites and facilities for us. So with that said, we have, as you know, a lot of different types of missions. We are very much always aware of the risks that's around us, obviously, and also learn to manage those risks. So I'll start off by saying, what are the tools we use? We are not only focusing just on technology, like Jing had said, we also focus on people, and we focus on other existing business processes that we have to help inform us in managing these risks, and especially the emerging risks. One of the things is we need to educate people. People are our most important assets. We are also know that, just like Jing says, imaginations, creativity, innovations all come from the minds of people. So they are our first and foremost, most valued resource and tool in any effective ERM program. We have a constant educational method to reach out to folks to raise awareness, such as webinars. We conduct a lot of webinars. We have provided webinars in the last fiscal year to over 2,500 participants, and we actually provide CPEs to these participants that join our webinars to increase awareness on risk analysis, on managing enterprise risks, as well as internal controls. So the more conversations we have to include risk as a topic, the more comfortable we will be as an organization in discussing those risks and becoming more transparent about the areas of concern. So through these educational forums and discussions, we're hoping that DOE as an organization and then flowing down to units will become more aware of those and will be able to inform themselves and calibrate in assessing risks, which leads us to a greater engagement strategy. So one of the things is we have a senior council on risk management. We meet twice a year. We make sure that we do a lot of pre-meeting engagement with these council members, consisting of top-level leadership of the department. Recently, I have, based on the new administration, we have a lot of new members on the council. And so what happens is we make sure they have informed, detailed information before these meetings. We engage them through meetings, pre-meetings. I know it's like the pre-meeting to a meeting, but we want to make sure that folks have the forum to ask questions before, a more formal congregation takes place. Does help to break the ice a little bit, make them be more comfortable to actually get more engaged at these senior meetings. The other piece is also when engaging individuals throughout the organization, it must be performed at all levels, not just around your peer level, but up and down. We always say we have to manage down, we have to manage up, and we have to manage all around. So that's where it's important to really get those engagement at all levels, be active, so that folks can have buy-in to us, understand our mission, understand why we need to manage these risks. We need to identify the risks and manage them. So we have to work with our program offices, and we also have to work with our field offices throughout the country. We also have to work with what I just mentioned, our M&Os, our management and operations contractors. A lot of them are very powerful. Some of them have a lot of connection with the Hill. So you have to be able to navigate those relationships. And also, they are our partners at the end of the day. They are the front line. The field folks, as well as M&Os, they run these facilities. They know what the risks are. At the headquarters, we rely a lot on these folks. So it tells us why, currently, for example, we have a lot of working groups throughout the enterprise. We have working groups that with many labs, for example, knowing that labs are 90% where our outflow of our funding goes to. So that means that we have to work with them to ensure that we have good controls in place, especially on fraud, improper payments. Those are risks to us, big risks to us. And so we have worked with some of these labs to pilot programs to have them direct access to the do not pay portal. So we have been working with Treasury over the past year and a half or so, and with the labs to get them access to the do not pay portal so that they can do some front end checks and lookups before payments are made by them to their vendors. So some of that, we have to work with the general counsel of all the labs. We have to work with the general counsel of Treasury as well as our own. So a lot of coordination, just like Jing was saying, coordination, communication, and collaborations are always the foundation of what we try to aim for. We also currently one of 3 pilot agencies with Treasury as well on the AVS program, which is the account verification system. This is really a fairly new pilot conducted by Treasury. It is to verify vendor bank account number to match the bank account owner. As you can tell, we focus a lot on fraud. We focus a lot on improper payments. We have very low improper payments for DOE, and we want to maintain it that way. And being that payments and financial concerns are under my purview, that's an area where I do look at very, very closely. So one of those beneficial pieces is that we have vendors that have exceptions to SAM registrations and invitational travelers who submit manual banking information to us. Those are not listed in our system. So with the AVS, we can actually leverage the tools for us externally. We also, like I mentioned earlier, educating folks, but it's also how do we educate people, not only through webinars. What we have discovered as very important tool as under the banner of people is inviting field staff to detail with us, because they bring a feel of, no pun intended, a feel of experience inside to the headquarters and give us insight into how the field and the labs work. And at the same time, we provide opportunities for them to understand how headquarters work. And there's a great collaboration and partnership through this in helping to manage risk. They know where the risk areas, for lack of a better word, they know where all those dirt is. So we work with them to identify programs, we identify and develop tools, and even putting any areas of risk on the risk register so that there is a focus on some of these areas. Obviously, we need commitments, and we have worked and reached out to our DOE's Office of AI Technology Office, the Artificial Intelligence and Technology Office at DOE. We are starting to take one of our use cases to work with them and then have them reach out to one of the labs to use AI technology to look into leases, embedded leases. It's a risk to us. As some of you may or may not know, FASEP is going to have standard 54 on leases become implemented. And we need to have the global pool at DOE, which is a very federated system, just like at HHS. We need to be able to go out and know what are the global pool of leases we have. But it is a huge undertaking. So one of the things that I think will be helpful is to have AI to start going through all the leases across the enterprise. So that's another tool that we are using to engage. We're engaging with people, we are engaging with technology. The other piece is governance. I mentioned we have a risk management council. They meet twice a year. They are the one that provide that structure for DOE to manage risk and also to come up with fraud strategy for the department. One of the things on risk, for example, is on climate change. We talk about climate every day, but how do we infuse the knowledge and understanding of this risk into everyday decision making and at the highest level as well? So the governance for managing risk is to acknowledge and identify climate change as one of our priorities for the department to manage. And so that's where an area that is not only just on financial side, but it's also on non-financial side. An example is at DOE, we have power marketing administrations, and climate change will impact how the grid is run. And of course, with our renewable energy programs, climate change is front and center, and Department of Energy is playing a major role in the current administration's push for net zero in carbon footprint. So those are areas that now is on the priority of the department and being managed across. So next slide, please. I mentioned about the back one. Okay, this is where I mentioned about the Risk Management Council. We also have the fraud strategy that I had mentioned about, that it's inside, and it's a subset of the council, the senior assessment team, and it's supported by the program and functional offices, the field offices, and all the M&O contractors. And the members just got approved in our year-end meeting by the council. It's consisting of all SCSers that will be providing the feed into the council on what the fraud strategy may be in managing overall risk. Next slide, please. We have a lot of data sets. We have a lot of historical information and data that helps inform us, as well as lessons learned from past experiences to come up with risk register. A risk register is really helping us to formalize what we know, right? Have a scoring system to be objective and to then help us prioritize to know which one to focus first. I alluded to climate change, and that's part of those risk register. We know that needs, what's coming from those areas as well. It's a good data source, and that we need to be able to use that for decision making. We need to use that for also trend analysis for the future, or even to benchmark some of our decision making. Pandemic is one of those we talked about earlier. Jing mentioned it's an unexpected event, and that is a risk that we know we will have it there. God forbid that we will have another, which we will hopefully not. But if we do, what do we have? We have a lot of data. And this is a risk that we know we can go back to and reach back in and manage them. All right. Next, please. Last but not least, technology. We talk about this, perhaps, the title and subject of this was technology, although I think we must acknowledge it is not the only piece in managing risks. Technology helps us. We use a lot of existing tools. We use new tools. We use anything you are familiar with, MicroStrategy, ServiceNow, right? We use Tableau. We've used Power BI. We use a lot of those for visualizations. We use a lot of those for analytics purposes. We do not have a lot of data at headquarters. We get a lot of data through the field offices and site offices that grabs those from the M&Os. And that's one of our challenge at headquarters. We rely on our partners at the field and our contractors so that we can get those data to analyze. So these are part of challenges we have to learn to overcome. Technology certainly has helped. The field are using those tools that we mentioned about earlier. They can actually, some of them have access directly to the contractor's data, and they can look at trends and they can analyze those, whether it's predictive analytics or whether they're using actual analytics to look at existing data sets to see whether there are fraud involved, whether there are anomalies, and if there are fraud, we refer those, a lot of them, to the IG or to DOJ to follow up with. So we also talk about using machine language, RPAs, AI to help us with data that we have that we can then extract to help us mitigate risks that are forthcoming that we know we need to deal with. We also, some of you may have heard about the deep fake videos. We are all on video right now. And some of you may have heard or seen those videos that have, I do think it was Tom Cruise. There was the real Tom Cruise and the fake Tom Cruise. Now, if you are like some of people I know, they have no idea who Tom Cruise is. But Tom Cruise is a very famous actor. If you guys know of him, apparently there were some videos out there that someone was able to kind of fudge and made it like real. So that's a potential cyber risk to us and which we will have to face. We are on videos 5 days a week at least. I wouldn't say 24/7, goodness, hopefully not. But we are definitely on videos almost every day, and that can be a threat to us. And some technology is where we will need to use to do some of these risk mitigation on. So with that, I just want to end by saying, we cannot do without people. We cannot do without ability to acknowledge what the lessons we have learned and using technologies to help us mitigate the future. We need all three, and we need people to help us wrap this around so that we can continue to be vigilant, like the deepfake videos, and to be aware of what those risks are and help management and leadership with these information, with structured approach and governance to get to where we need to be, that we will never be able to eliminate all risk, but certainly we will be able to mitigate them, right?
Awesome.
Any
Thank you,
questions?
Karen.
I will refer. All right. Thank you.
All right, so last we have our presentation from Alyssa Smiley at the Department of Homeland Security. Alyssa?
Hi, good morning. So I would like to say that my mitigation approach to Karen's raised identified risk of videos is by having my video off. Unfortunately, that's not the case, so I do apologize for the equipment challenges that I'm facing today, but I'm going to take credit for it as my risk mitigation to that. But I'm thrilled to be here with you guys today to discuss a little bit about what Homeland Security is doing, some of the risks that we've identified and are working through, as well as some of the risk management approaches, right, that DHS has put into place based off of some of the lessons learned. You know, we're a growing agency. We have very vast and disparate mission goals and objectives within our agency. And so risk management for us, as with both of the prior speakers, is a pretty complex process. So just want to dive into that a little bit today with you all. So next slide for our program overview. So I do work for the Risk Management and Assurance Office at Homeland Security. We are actually structured underneath the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. So this, you know, I've seen it across many federal agencies. You know, ERM, it's been around now for several years. It's gotten a lot of attention over the past several years. But when you think back 10, 15 years ago in federal government, a lot of risk management was very much constrained. At least the thought of it, the verbiage of it, the quantification of it was very much existent in most of the chief financial offices because financial reporting just got so much attention at that point. You know, as ERM has grown, as that has expanded to really place equal focus on risk areas such as compliance, regulatory risk, operational risk, reporting risk. You know, we've started to see that branch out. But Homeland Security, again, like many of the other federal agencies, a lot of that is still growing out of the Chief Financial Officer. You know, we've certainly expanded from there, but from an organizational structure, the CFO still plays a major contributor to that. So for our office, you know, we really focus on risk identification and mitigation. So again, this is not solely financially driven. We do try to make sure that we've identified and quantified any financial impact with any of the risks that we have identified and are tracking, but we don't limit the risks that we are monitoring based off of it being a solely financial risk. We do also focus on internal controls over financial reporting. So when you think about risk mitigation and risk management, a lot of that will start to flow into your internal control programs within your federal agencies, offices, state programs. And so internal controls, again, primarily falls under the purview of our division. For DHS, if you're not familiar, we are mandated by law to have an internal controls over financial reporting opinion. So while a lot of federal agencies do self-reporting, obviously under OMB guidance and regulatory requirements, you know, federal agencies have to assert the internal controls over financial reporting. However, for many other federal agencies, it's not actually mandated to have an external opinion on your internal controls over financial reporting. So that's been one of the balancing points for DHS when we think about what does enterprise risk management look like for our organization, with that nuance, right, that we have to get a clean opinion on internal controls over financial reporting. So when you think about risk expanding from finance areas to operational areas and reporting areas, We really don't have a lot of luxury to potentially absorb additional financial risk in order to buy down operational risk, right? We have to be able to obtain and sustain a clean financial reporting opinion, which means, we have to give that consistent focus while also trying to resource and adequately mitigate any of those operational and reporting risks as well. Our shop also looks at internal controls over financial systems. Again, we do cover systems outside of our financial systems, but really anything that can potentially impact a dollar, right? So we cover all of our property systems, HR systems. So we do cover about 10 to 20% of DHS's system environment. And this has really grown over the years. When you think about risk, financial risk has always been there, will always be there. But really, you've seen the risk over IT technology and systems drastically changing, right? So again, if you think back 5 or 10 years ago, some of the technology that we use today couldn't have even been comprehended. And so it is very fast moving. That also means it is a prime area for risk, and obviously an area where we need to focus on for risk mitigation. And then we also cover data analytics. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail when we go through the risk management process and approach here at DHS. So next slide, for some of the lessons learned. So again, DHS, in comparison to a lot of other federal agencies, we're actually a pretty young organization, but we've been around for a while now. So we do have a couple of lessons learned. And so, risk in itself, that word generally has a very negative connotation. So that's one of the things that we focus at very heavily at Homeland Security, is to try to have the term of risk be more positively received, right? So the fact that we have risks, it's never going to change. We are always going to have risk, right? Identifying risk is not a bad thing. Where you really start to get a negative side of that is when you don't react or respond to risk appropriately, right? And so again, we're really pushing our organization and our personnel within the organization to think about the risk identification process in a positive manner. Knowing about risk, reacting to risk is a positive thing versus a negative thing. We also really push that risk identification is the responsibility of everyone, right? We all have our own job functions within the organization. We all have different lenses that we look at. And so because of that, we need everyone to be involved in being on the lookout for new and emerging risks, and also raising their hand and communicating those risks when they see them. Part of that, though, is, our population of identified risks can get very large very, very quickly. And so in order to assist in our prioritization process, we really have to all, when I say all, across the organization, across all leadership levels, and communicating down to staff levels as well, we need to understand what is our organization's risk appetite and our different risk tolerances, right? And this, it can change. It can change on the environment. It can change on who our leadership is at the time. And so again, this is just something we need to keep, keep in close communication. We need to make sure that we're all on the same page when we think about how much risk is our organization willing to absorb, right? And when we're not willing to absorb the risk, we all need to be on the same page that we need to adequately respond to that. And then one of the other things, again, for DHS specifically, velocity can matter, right? So when you think about risk quantification and reacting to risk, a lot of times we think about, obviously, impact, we think about likelihood. We don't always think about velocity. And so because of our mission and the objectives of our mission across DHS, a lot of risks that we identify may be very short-lived risks, but they may come upon us extremely quickly, right? And so when you think about activities for example, that FEMA needs to respond to from an emergency management perspective. You know, when you think about hurricanes, they may have a longer time period to prepare for that. They obviously know when hurricane season is, so they can prepare for that. But there's unknowns, right, that can come about pretty quickly. And that's where you'll see, you know, a couple years ago when we had Hurricane Harvey, Irma, Maria, all hit in very quick succession, there was really not a lot of planning time for that. And so that's a good example of where your risk prioritization and your risk quantification process may need to adjust to account for how quickly a risk can go from being identified to being realized, and that may need to adjust on how you are responding to those risk areas as well. So I know a couple of the other things have already been covered, and I'll talk about them on a few other slides, but you know, DHS continues to learn as we go, as I think all federal agencies do. And we try to apply that to some of the new and emerging risks that we have been seeing. So on our next slide, you can see over the past 2 years, DHS has had just a bunch of new and emerging risks. And some of these, I would say, I would expect other entities other than DHS to have also been experiencing, some maybe a little bit more DHS specific. But these are 3 good examples. So obviously COVID-19, everybody has had new and emerging risks associated with the pandemic. So things like your personnel health and safety, having to work in new operating structures, right? Those are generally standardized risks that all entities are facing. Some of the new DHS risks that we have incurred are, you know, supplemental funding. So last year when we did lost wages assistance, FEMA was pinged to support that. So that was a brand new program, something that DHS had never done. We didn't have a lot of time to react to that. So again, one of the new risk areas there. Immigration has obviously been very impacted for us as well because of COVID-19. So we're not seeing the immigration numbers that we historically have. Obviously that impacts our fee collection numbers. We also have to think about for immigrants that are coming into the country, you know, what are we doing for their health and safety under the structure as well? So again, some operational risks as well as financial risks that we have to consider with something as unexpected as the pandemic. For DHS, you know, cybersecurity is one of our main goals and objectives as well. So again, over the past 2 years, you've seen a lot of news, a lot of attention on election integrity that stays as a very high risk area for us and something that we need to make sure we've appropriately mitigated. You think about cybersecurity and the resilience to any of those cyber attacks, whether that be ransomware, whether that be our workforce, especially in a primarily virtual environment. Lately, you've heard a lot about supply chain, some of the holdups there. Again, DHS has their hand in that. When you think about the security of the supply chain process, federal networks, all of those things. Again, when we think about operational risk areas, we have to make sure that we are adequately identifying and responding to these risks as well. And then obviously with some US and global issues, you know, all administrations have been impacted whenever there's a political change. So again, we could foresee that coming. You don't always know what goals and objectives the new political administration might have. So some of those need a quicker response time. And then a couple of the new things, obviously, you know, for DHS, the southern border migration has definitely really expanded from a risk perspective just because of the unforeseen increases in just the number of immigrants and the detention requirements for that. And then obviously we've seen some additional risks, resourcing requirements when we talk about refugee and immigrant processing for those coming from Afghanistan as well. So again, you can see here we have quite a mixture, even in just a very small subset of risk that could be foreseen and a lot of areas that may not have been easy to foresee. So next slide, how does DHS deal with this? So our general approach, we really aligned it to the COSO framework. So you can see going from governance and culture all the way down through information, communication, and reporting. This is how we've generally aligned those areas to our risk management process. So you see definitely in the blue, defining risk appetite in our organizational strategies, but then also in those green areas, right? When we talk about performing risk management, what does that mean? And you'll see here, we've outlined steps from identification to prioritization, and then ultimately to response, right? And acknowledging that there are multiple response options. You do not always have to mitigate. So again, just definitely making sure that we communicate the options for response and make sure that those are being chosen appropriately based off of our risk quantification and approaches. The next slide, when we talk about assisting technologies, how is that supporting that approach and framework that we've outlined? So as Karin and Jing have already mentioned, we use heavy dashboarding, so utilizing tools such as SharePoint, Tableau, R. We have RPA being executed, and so that's historically what we relied on. That's very much what we rely on today in order to do a lot of the analytics and visualizations, very similar to what the other ladies have mentioned. Your future state, again, we have some of this in play already, but it's really just in a state of expansion. We have blockchaining, right? So when we think about import tracking, validation, that supply chain security, DHS has really venturing into the blockchain capabilities when we talk about that. Data analytics, when we think about fee reduction trends, immigration trends, sampling approaches, we're really using that data analytics capability. Robotics process automation has already been in place for things like charge card analysis, but also thinking about what could robotics process automation do for us going forward in enhancing what are today very manual processes in order to mitigate risk. And then machine learning. So like when we think about robotics process automation and data analytics, is really coupling that with machine learning capability, right? So that we aren't burdened necessarily by manual maintenance of those capabilities, but allowing the capability itself to continue to enhance and learn, as we give it new data in that process. So we don't have all of this fully figured out. Again, we learn, we change our approach as we go. But these are a lot of tools and technologies that DHS is currently utilizing to help either identify, monitor, or manage some of those risk areas that we've identified. So I'll kick it back to you, Alyssa, if we have some questions, I think.
Yep, we definitely do. Thank you so much, Alyssa. What a great perspective as to the emerging risks that DHS faces and kind of how quickly you guys have to adapt. All right, so let's go over to our audience questions. Jing, it looks like the most popular one is for you, so let's start with that. So in regards to HHS's IT infrastructure that you're using to integrate the risk and control data, are you using any low or no code tools?
Well, we're currently using data analytic tool as well as IRM tool to help us collecting data, analyzing the risk, and providing the dashboard for us to understand the risk. So I'm not so proficient in understanding the code or no code, but I'll definitely refer back to our technical team and get back to the audience.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Karin, I think this one popped up while you were talking. How is the work that you are doing as it relates to risk management used for strategic planning purposes? And you're on mute, so.
Double mute. Technology. So we do use a lot of our risk profiles that we have, and we connect those with budget guidance And those budget guidance obviously are tied to our strategic goals that we develop at the departmental level. So for example, now one of the things we have incorporated into our risk management tool, America, is, by the way, we did build that on low code using Apex, which is part of the Oracle, Oracle stack. So we have actually developed that America tool that will help then. Now the next part is to link all the risks that we have to budget. And we have a budget tool called the funds distribution system. So one of the things that we have requested funding is to link our risk tool to the budget tool. And then eventually the plan is to link all of those with performance measurement and back to execution. So it's going to be in a circular loop. So, and of course, like I said, that is all guided by our.
Awesome. All right, so I think we have time for one more. Alyssa, this one seems pretty popular. When looking at emerging risks, do you guys have a time frame that you use to quantify, maybe 12 or 18 months?
Yeah, so for our risk identification tools and spreadsheets and how we do that, obviously there's multiple factors when we think about quantifying risk. I would say that's one of the biggest challenges for a risk management program is how do you gather extremely different data and ultimately assign a fairly consistent quantification approach. So at the end of the day, I can compare a very financial risk to a very operational risk and be able to prioritize them to the same leadership. And so, yeah, when you think about velocity and likelihood and time potential to realize a risk, we ask different areas to think about what does that mean from the time between potential identification all the way through until realization. And then we use a risk register that has been prioritized, right? So for financial risk, for example, we have a risk register with a priority 1, 2, and 3. What we've identified as priority 1 are those risks that need leadership attention today. A lot of those are obviously risks that we would expect to be realized within a 12-month window, or risks that, regardless of when they're realized, are just so detrimental that we need to start working that mitigation plan today. And then you'll see risk 2 being more, that 12-month to 2-year, 3-year potential window, and risk 3 being further out than that. So realizing that leadership today may not be leadership tomorrow, and those risks that we're tracking on risk 3 may actually have to go through multiple different leadership chains. But yeah, absolutely. So we do think about the time to realize risks, and that does play a fact into what prioritization we put them into and our quantification process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, ladies. Well, thank you so much for joining our panel today. It was a pleasure to have you all and such wonderful insights that you provided.